start with your journey. When you were my age, did you think this is what you were going to be doing?
Absolutely not. But I would say I would be doing some sort of a problem solving. I love maths. Maths was my poison at my age, and probably, if there was something else that I would have been doing is to play for India, play for cricket. I used to be a passionate bowler. I think that cricket is significantly unfair towards bowlers with new rules. So as a bowler, I just want to represent India and represent that fraternity better. So it's passionate. So maybe if things went my way, I would have probably been bowling in the nets or in tournaments and not do Beckon right now.
How would you describe Beckon and ONDC to someone young who's hearing about it in the news without going too deep into technology?
Beckon for me is as simple as the language, the natural language is like English. It's very simple in the sense that for English, we all have a common dictionary. If I were to use my own choice of dictionary or create my own dictionary for a language like English, and I change the meanings of words that you understand, for example, say yellow is a color in the spectrum, and I say yellow is something else, maybe this chair that I'm sitting. We're going to lose communicating, understanding each other because we suddenly chose not to use a common dictionary. Beckon is just a common dictionary for two machines to talk to each other and understand an economic transaction. An economic transaction could be a commerce transaction where a buyer is buying, let's say, an electronic accessory from a local store nearby. It could be a rider looking for a ride from any of the ride-hailing companies. It could be a patient looking for a doctor's teleconsultation appointment. A battery looking for extra energy from a grid. So Beckon essentially focuses on discovery and fulfillment of an economic resource. The resource could be any of these that I just said, or a teacher looking for a student to teach something. So for me, to make that thing happen, you need two machines to understand the context of economic transaction. And that has to be a common language which machines can semantically understand. And that's what I see Beckon as. So Beckon is as simple as language. If you need a common language for two machines to communicate, to do something useful, like a wholesome economic transaction, like a ride booking or an e-commerce shopping, etc.
Hesitancy when it comes to accepting big ideas like Beckon and ONDC often stems from the fear of having a big brother looking at everyone's lives, the fear of corruption. It's something I think slightly hinders the next generation from accepting it. I think we're all a bit reluctant nowadays. What are the steps that have been taken to ensure that doesn't ever happen?
That's a great question, by the way, and it's something that we think about constantly and more seriously. So first of all, when we were designing Beckon, it is designed as a peer-to-peer protocol, which means there's no center. There's no center for somebody to observe or do surveillance or take a look at. So a transaction between any two computers just remains between those two computers. There's no central aggregator or a central authority in any sense. So we go with this principle of optimal ignorance, where only the participants involved in this conversation, like you and me in this conversation, know it. And there's no third party watching or observing. And that's how Beckon as a protocol is designed. So there's fundamentally privacy available for both parties participating in the conversation. And then on top of that, it allows for significant amount of transparency of rules and policies. So I can overlay policies on the protocol, make it transparent and not lopsided, favoring one party and not the other. They say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Similarly, open policies or open protocol is the best way to solve for some of this any kind of red tape, corruption that you normally see in a societal framework. So Beckon allows you that with a decentralized open model where governance is transparent and open. And then fundamentally the transaction or the conversation or economic exchange is confined to the two parties with no third person getting an access to that. Sort of keeps it a safe, inclusive and comfortable sort of an ecosystem to be part of.
I'm 16 years old.
Right.
When I'm 25, what would my day look like in a fully Beckon-enabled world?
Excellent. So looks like at 21 you'll be working, heading out to work. Probably you're running late that day and probably skipping breakfast. So you need a ride to go to office, and you also like to have at least a coffee on the way. Today, if you were to do it, you probably would have to book a ride on one app and search for coffee. Either you probably order coffee before you get into the cab or reach office and do that. But here's one moment in your future self of 21 years old where you can order a cab and then have a coffee delivered to a moving cab, where the delivery address is the moving car of another company which you just managed to book through Beckon. So with Beckon, you can bring all of these diverse sort of needs into one contextual seamless experience. And that's probably the future with Beckon, where things are seamlessly available to you to fulfill your purpose of whatever you set out to achieve, rather than you taking that load, either cognitive or physical load, onto yourself to sort things out yourself. Yeah, so probably it'll be a little too pampered at that time with a seamless experience. You control the choices and not the choices control you. And that's the sort of freedom you will enjoy in the world with Beckon, hopefully soon. Yeah.
You're taking on some monolithic firms with a lot of money and resources. Uber, Amazon, these are fairly big names. Why does David beat Goliath?
It's interesting you asked that. I think 2-3 things. One, I don't think personally or as Beckon we're taking on anybody big. We're just going back to the old school thinking of interoperability. I think we all like internet. We all know what internet has done to for economic value creation, for societal values and all that. It gives us agency, freedom. It actually gave power to the people, users of internet, because you could discover, you can create content, you can probably put together a social network for yourself and do all of that. Somewhere along the way, we sort of seem to have abdicated this interoperability as a principle and we started centralizing. We said we need somebody as a middleman to facilitate that exchange, so that I will be the one deciding whom you exchange anything with, whether you're booking a taxi or finding a place to stay or even social network, right? So what we are saying is that the only model? The answer is no. There is another model, and that's what internet taught us. So we're going back to that old school thinking of a decentralized interoperable way, which probably adds more value, just like how internet did. I mean, none of these models would have existed today if there was no internet in the first place, and internet itself is sort of decentralized. What we are saying with Beckon is, therefore, we are saying, no, you should stop doing centralization. But in addition to that, you can also think about the ways of going for decentralization, economic value creation, expansion, which probably you as one solo player may not be able to do. So just to take examples of mobility or commerce, India's digital commerce is so underpenetrated. For population and diversity of India, I don't think 1 or 2 big companies are going to cut it. We need more people solving for this, distributing that ability to solve, and that's where an idea like Beckon comes. So it's an opportunity even for the quote-unquote Goliaths to participate, because the market is expanding because of the ideas of Beckon, right? Similarly for mobility, you can't just have 2 or 3 big mobility companies doing it for the scale and size of India. You need everybody to participate in making the mobility an inclusive one for the whole population. And there again, it's an expansion of market story. There's more economic value getting created. So I don't think this is a David taking on Goliath. It's about having many more people coming together and participate, rather than 1 or 2 people assuming that they will be able to solve for everybody, which is not the case, or they trying to be just the winner take all. So it's more of inclusion, open, and innovation where everybody participates. Nobody is getting displaced. The whole market is expanding in a big that you'll have many more startups and innovators coming, and we're not just overly dependent on just 1 or 2 platforms.
Absolutely. Just to quickly follow up on that, do you think there'll be a reluctance to give up some of that market power, that market share?
I see this in the form of cycles. Initially, there'll be reluctance because every change tends to be perceived as a threat before seen as an opportunity. And I think UPI is a great example. I think many people thought UPI as a threat, but what UPI fundamentally did is taken this country from a few 100 million payment transactions electronic in a month, to being a 9.5 billion transactions a month. We are bigger than US, China, UK put together today on a monthly basis. So there is that market expansion, but that expansion comes a tad later, a phase later. So initially people tend to see it as a threat, but then they see the bigger picture of what the larger economic value creation is. They will sort of recalibrate. Oh, I thought this was a $100 million market, but it's actually a $100 billion market. And so when they start recalibrating, they see this as an opportunity. And we'll go through those phases. So initially, everybody probably sees this as a threat, but we'll overcome that and hopefully soon.
Do you see an open, decentralized network like Beckon being adopted in other countries?
For sure, yeah. Firstly, Beckon has the underlying protocol fabric for open decentralized network is open source globally, so anybody can use it even without talking to us. It's there in GitHub. Anybody can pick it and start imagining with Beckon. We are already having countries imagine with Beckon. We have a few countries in Europe wanting to do something with Beckon, like how India is doing it, either in the space of retail, mobility, arts and culture, hospitality, learning. So we have more than one country thinking about it. Hopefully, within a year or two, you will see some of these open networks coming up in other countries too. And this is not just in Africa, but Africa, Europe, Latin America. We're already having some sort of early conversations there. So
yeah, there's mention of France, right? France wanting. Could you just briefly talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, in France, we are looking at 3 pilot projects, maybe 2 on a more concrete basis. One, so France is probably the home for OpenStreetMaps. They have a big OpenStreet community there. So we're looking at how OpenStreetMaps can enable OpenStreet commerce by using OpenStreetMaps as and any OpenStreetMap enabled app, and putting a beacon on top of it so that anybody visiting France, and if he happens to use an app that uses OpenStreetMaps, can actually not just find places like a restaurant for dinner or whatever, but he can also probably look at the menu and even place an order and have somebody pick it up and have it delivered, or probably look for a ride to get to that restaurant. So that's one of the things. The other project we're looking at is in the area of culture, where we're looking at a platform, Past Culture, which offers some sort of subsidy to 18-year-olds, people like you, to have an exposure to culture. So you get about 300 euros to see where you can spend it in a cultural event or in any sort of cultural, immersion, whether it's merchandise purchase or any such events. As part of that platform, we're looking at sort of enabling a backend to sort of solve for the problem of mobility. So let's say that I do want to go for a cultural event, but it's a bit far off. I do need to find a transport or taxi to get there and pay for it. So it was one of the very oftenly occurring problem. So we said we'll take Beckon and enable that to discover any local taxi, like what we're doing with Beckon in Bangalore. So that's one of the extensions. Start from there and look at other use cases that goes along with the whole culture setting in that particular platform. It's called Past Culture. So it's some early proof of concepts that we have done. Maybe similar for hyperlocal commerce and others. Some conversations around Olympics that are happening next year to see if there's some proof of concept, some sandboxes, innovation sandboxes we can create to help the startup community there to see if there is value in this concept of decentralized, interoperable mobility and commerce, and pick up some ideas and run with.
We live in a country with tremendous wealth and income inequality. With Beckon enabling more firms and thus competing with different types of industry, do you see the potential for greater income equality in the future?
Well, that's a big one. I'm not too sure if it directly leads to income equality, but it seems to enable that in some sense. If I were to look at any economy is a collection of markets. Market is a collection of consumers and providers in some sense. So what Beckon does is it restores agency to both consumers and providers to sort of beckon at their own command an opportunity to discover something, to make themselves discoverable for an opportunity, for employment or for selling something. So Beckon sort of brings that sort of equity into play, and it provides the autonomy for somebody to do something on their own at their own command. So when it comes to accessing the market, and today digital is the reality. We live in a digital world, so harnessing digital for their own upliftment, empowerment today without being at the mercy of any middleman or anybody. I think that's what Beckon does. To that extent, it gives that sort of an opportunity for them to participate formally in a wider economy and benefit from them, whether it's access education, access work or employment, or access a business opportunity. And that's what Beckon solves for. So I'm assuming if we can take away these sort of unfreedoms that exist today for some of these matters with Beckon, maybe in the long run, it may contribute. I don't know about how much, but it will contribute in some way to the larger income equality that we're looking at.
What are the top 3 obstacles in the way of a sizable Beckon-enabled e-commerce ecosystem?
For me, I think Beckon is only as good as the network that adopts it. I think we need more people actually embracing this new way of thinking, to embrace interoperability and to be able to work through this collective way of exchanging. So we all agree to use certain languages to speak, like we all chose to speak English or native languages. Similarly, I think it requires that sort of an awakening where everybody thinks that, okay, this is a better way to do it. And especially when there's a deep legacy of doing it the other way for the last 2.5 decades when it comes to digital economy or commerce in general. So that shift will take time. So that's one of the big challenges, how soon and how many would find this a way of doing things the better way and then embracing it. The second is the actual talent and the idea density that has to come into Beckon. How can people imagine some of the things that we just spoke about, like putting together this idea of combinatorial innovation around mobility and food, or finding a doctor and a parking and doing EV charging, all with tech, and it requires problem solvers, innovators, tech upstarts. I think that there are so many opportunities here, so many possibilities here, and it requires many more startups, many more young minds to come into this and use backend to solve some of these problems. So that's one of the other obstacles of bringing idea and talent density into this. The third is fundamentally about, does this model offer the trust to the larger ecosystem? And the actual consumers and providers are using any platform connected to sort of a backend network. How do we make sure that they think that this sort of a new thing does not fall back onto the old manners of whatever is the digital e-commerce that happens? And that requires a layer of governance and policy guardrails around it, some of the things I spoke about, and that requires people to constantly think and work towards it. The protocol has probably done its bit, but in terms of institutions like Y-ONDC and others who are adopting backend to create a nationwide network, there's a constant effort to make sure that some of these are done in the manner that brings this sort of inclusion and trust and transparency into it, and that's a constant endeavor. And nobody has done this before. Nobody has done this kind of a model before. So there is a lot of learning coming in the way, and it is complex because it used to be just one platform where you can do everything. Now we are breaking it apart into multiple platforms which come together to solve for this, and that's sort of has its nuances, has its sort of elements of friction. But given that that's how internet was, we think that over a period of time it will get solved. But getting there and then getting out of this cold start problem is one of the obstacles that while it's temporary, I think it's still an obstacle right now.
If we were doing this interview in 3 years, what would success look like for you personally?
In 3 years, okay. In 3 years, I'd see mobility like the one that you're seeing with Namayatri on backend happening in Bangalore to be happening across maybe 100 cities. I see Y-ONDC like e-commerce being available in every town and city in India, probably on every pin code, where people can use Y-ONDC to not just buy grocery and retail or food, but over 100 categories of merchandise. I see backend being adopted for patients in far-flung rural villages to be getting into teleconsultation seamlessly with specialists living in cities and towns, with a local doctor assisting them with assisted care and assisted teleconsultations. I see a lot of that happening. I see about 50 million students using backend-enabled network to find new courses, discovering places where they can learn, places where they can apply for internship, places where they can apply for scholarships. All of this in 3 years, maybe not, but hopefully some of this. But I definitely would want to visualize some of these happening in 3 years.
Manifested, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any general advice outside backend and Y-ONDC to my generation?
Fundamentally, I think generally curiosity and critical thinking is fundamental to how we look at the future. If you want to build the future, I think these two are the fundamental traits. I think having a point of view, thinking in multiple orders, the first order and the second order effects of what this looks like. Yeah, and just having a passion to be a builder and not be a manager. Build things, create things. And I think your generation does it far better than probably mine. Continue with that. Have that passion to create things. Think from a larger world. Like for India is just not just one bunch of people. It's a whole diverse, large, complex world we live in. We have climate effects. We have poverty. We have exclusion of various kinds, multidimensional poverty as we call it. There are hard problems and they're at population scale, not just in India but across the world. So maybe the young minds should spend time to think, is there any way I can contribute to that problem solving? We're not solving the whole problem by itself, but contribute. Whether it's with or without digital, with any form of discipline you think it's important. And having that critical thinking and bringing that ability, and to also kind of learn to collaborate. Instead of being a solo lone hero, I believe in this, that one should not be a lone hero trying to solve everything. Work together and distribute that ability to solve. I think that's one of the things that little hacks. If I were at your age, if had I known this, probably I would have looked at this world differently and done different things. So That's probably one advice I would want to give you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.